Looking around at the world, it's easy to feel defeated or in despair. We aren't the first people to feel this way. Centuries ago, God's people were taken into exile under hostile rulers. Yet God equipped them not only to survive, but to thrive. Through the book of Daniel, God invites us to do the same, shining like stars in the midst of the darkness.
That's on me. There's only one switch, really. Yeah. So good to see all of you. We're in a series right now called Thriving Over Surviving, because that's what we want to do, right? We want to get past just surviving in the world, but we actually want to take steps toward thriving despite the difficulties and setbacks that each of us face along the way in life, and there are plenty of them. And this book of Daniel in the Old Testament has been this incredible example for us over the past few weeks of what it looks like to honor God through a bunch of the different challenges in a culture that really doesn't primarily honor God. Today, we are looking at an 85-plus-year-old Daniel who gets thrown into a lion's den. Anybody heard the story about Daniel in the lion's den? Anybody heard that one before? Okay, pretty popular story in the Bible. One of the most famous in the whole Bible, what no one points out, is that just getting thrown in the den at 85 years old was pretty terrible, okay? But I remember learning about this story when I was a kid from a picture kids Bible. Anybody seen a picture of Daniel in the lion's den that looked kind of like this? Yeah, like, there he is. He looks like he's about 6 years old. And he's about to lose a hand if he doesn't watch out. Anyway, there's another one, maybe you've seen this one, of male pattern baldness Daniel, who is also chilling in the, I mean, they're just, those are real happy and all. Or if you've been around a little longer and, you think of the lion's den, you might think of the lion being kind of like this guy. Some of you are familiar. Just peaceful, wearing a bow in his hair. I'm sure all of those things are well-meaning, but let's just get this out of the way. That is not the story we're reading today. That is not what this is. This is not a cat cafe, okay? We only think about lions this way because in our culture, we live in a place we don't have to look over our shoulder and wonder if we're going to get eaten. That's the reason. Lions are not cuddly. Lions are malicious. In fact, I one time in my life had a lesson on how to fight a lion. It was pretty fun. I was in Kenya with a bunch of students, and we were way, way out in the bush with a group of people called the Maasai tribe. There's a picture, actually. I was out there with them. I'm the one in the middle. And you couldn't tell. And not only do they have colorful, awesome outfits, they actually fight lions. In fact, killing a lion for a Maasai warrior is like a rite of passage, becoming a man. We give them Instagram, and they kill a lion. It seems about fair, right? And so as you might expect, as they're talking about this, when we're out there with them, I was like, I want to learn how to kill a lion. How do you do that? And they're like, okay, we'll teach you how to kill a lion. The first thing you got to do is you got to get the right weapons. So they pulled out their spears. And they're like, you have to have a spear, and you have to have a shield. And that's the first thing you have to do. And then you have to learn how to use your weapons. And of course, most of your time spent in training, you're not actually throwing your spear at a lion. You're just practicing how to throw it. In fact, it turns out that throwing the spear is quite the art. There's a video of me learning to throw the spear, which I'm thankful that somebody took. And they all showed me as they're teaching, that's a real spear. You can see there's a sharp end on both sides. They all showed me that they have a scar on their arm, because as they're learning to throw their spear, they have to throw it in such a way that the backside of the spear doesn't hit them in the arm. I threw my spear not very far, and it hit a bush, and it didn't hurt the bush. So I just, I decided that killing a lion is probably not my thing. They said that once you do that, though, you need to go in a group. When you go to fight a lion, you want to be able to hit your lion from your side so the lion turns to you, and then somebody else can throw a spear from the other side, the lion turns to them. And as you surround the lion, you can hit it enough times, and eventually the lion dies, and all of you make it out, and you go get your spear. And I said, okay, but what happens? You only have your spear, right? You throw your spear, and it hits the lion, and what if the lion turns and runs toward you? And they all kind of laughed, and they were like, you just have to run faster than the guy next to you. I'm like, you guys make that joke too? That's our joke. Okay. And at that point, I decided fighting lions is probably not in my future. I got on the plane and I came home. I learned a lot about it, and it made me think about this story because the story in Daniel chapter 6 of Daniel in the lion's den, we always think of it as it's about Daniel with lions. We got to figure out how to fight lions. We need to learn how to fight lions, and this is the incredible story of faith, and I want to jump into the story in Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 other administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. And because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Remember, Daniel, he is not a Mede or a Persian, the current ruling folks. He is not a Babylonian, the nation that they conquered. He is a Hebrew, a nation that they enslaved years ago. But for more than 70 years now, Daniel has been navigating all the shifting sands of culture, and he has found time and time again ways to thrive, not just to survive in the culture in which he lived. And Daniel once again finds himself in a highly influential position in the kingdom. He becomes now like a Secretary of State sort of role. And look at verse 4 as it continues to talk about Daniel. The other administrators and high officers began to search for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. Now, we could spend an entire week just talking about these verses and never get to the lion's den. I love these verses. They're some of the most incredible leadership lesson verses in the Bible. Look back at what it said about Daniel in the last couple of verses. He was more capable than everyone else. He had great ability despite all the trials that he faced. Daniel did a really, really good job at his job. Here is an 80-plus-year-old man running circles around all the other high-ups in this nation. Isn't that great? It brings us to our first big takeaway here that's so important for us. Friends, you aren't done until God says you're done. You aren't done until God says you're done. In Daniel's case, here he is in his older years. He's still doing what he's always done. He's working hard to do awesome at his job no matter the situation. And maybe for you, it's like Daniel, it's your age, or maybe you're in a situation with a rough company or a very difficult boss or whatever it is, and you have a temptation in you to just kind of mail it in because actually you have reasons. You have reasons why you could, and maybe nobody would even care. Maybe that's part of the dysfunction around you. Let's take a lesson from Daniel. It doesn't have to do with the nation or the boss or the job. You aren't actually working for them anyway. Did you remember that? Not really. Colossians 3:23 tells us you work willingly at whatever you do as though you're working for the Lord rather than for people. If you walk with Jesus, you're working primarily for him. He's the boss, and your age, your job description, your boss, your coworkers, none of those are the most important thing. Young people on the other end of the spectrum, did you know that your teachers or your coaches and your parents in many ways are not the standard of how you should live your life? Your life is given to you by God. You're old enough to know that. And you get to give it all back to him every day, the gift of life he's given you, by putting your all into whatever it is you do. Daniel just keeps working hard all the way through his life from 15 years old to almost 90, and it showed all the way through, so much so other people start getting jealous of him. I mean, some things never change, right? You just do a really good job at what you do, and somebody gets upset about it. And they don't celebrate how he was helping make their nation better or, doing a really good job. They're trying to find ways to take him out because he was making them look bad. So they start trying to bring something against him. They couldn't find anything. Isn't that fantastic? He was so faithful in his attitude and his commitment in his life that there was nothing that would stick against him. They couldn't come up with anything. He may not have even known it yet, but Daniel was in training and preparation to fight against lions. We're not even to the lions yet. He's in training to fight lions, and he shows us how to do it too. In our life, how do we fight the lions? We're not fighting lions with spears and swords, shields. It's different for us, but we had better prepare for battle, friends, because we have a different kind of lions in our lives nonetheless. What should we do? Well, modeling after Daniel, we should make sure that we develop airtight, consistent character. Airtight, consistent character is what he had in his life. I mean, what if we just did that? What an incredible part of the story. Here we are, almost 3,000 years later, and no one has ever had anything at all bad to say about Daniel. Isn't that awesome? Did he make mistakes in his life? I'm sure he did, but every day he made the little decisions at the highest level of character so that when it came around to it, there was nothing of substance that even the people closest to him could hold on to hold against him. Instead, according to the verses we read, he was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. What a description of Daniel. Faithful to whom? Well, first of all, we already know from looking over his life, faithful to God. We've seen it throughout his life. He's also faithful to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, these guys that he walks the journey with up until this chapter. He's also faithful over the years to 4 different kings from 2 different nations. Seemingly faithful to all of his co-workers and the people that he interacts with. He's almost 90 years old. He just developed character of faithfulness to God over and over and over again, and it showed. He was also responsible. I like to say he was response-able, because that's what he did throughout his life, is he responded to whatever was coming at him. He was able to keep his head no matter the situation. He wasn't driven by his emotions. He didn't ignore things or decide that they were beneath him, because after all, they weren't his job and he's a slave anyway. He instead, when things were given to him, he modeled responsibility. He was responsible even when the kings that he was serving were irresponsible. Daniel was completely trustworthy. Think about this. 3 different countries across multiple languages with completely different worldviews coming at him all the time. Daniel was found to be totally trustworthy. He made sure that his yes was yes and his no was no. He made sure that he didn't share things that were out of place with someone that didn't need to know or start gossip. He never belittled somebody or lost trust with them behind their back. At least no one ever knew about it. Friends, he certainly had opportunities to do that. He worked for some of the biggest narcissists in the history of the world. There's a lot to talk about. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar, his longtime boss, after being warned in a destructive dream, about a destructive statue in his life, decides to wake up and build a statue that's 60 feet tall of himself and made everybody worship it. I mean, narcissist. But Daniel, day by day, throughout his life, he made little choices not to make the comment, not to share the story. He made the choice to be counted on even if he disagreed with the decision. He wasn't just a good guy, he was completely trustworthy. What an incredible heritage of character. Daniel spent his lifetime developing airtight, God-honoring character, and now he's remembered for it. Now, flip that around for a second on our lives. In your Babylon, with the threat of lions in your life, what would other people say about your character? What would they say? Are you faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy? Is that something that people can say about you? Because in the character of Daniel, is that the kind of character you are choosing to live in your life? If you are convicted by that at all today, remember that there was no major moment where everything just kind of flipped on for Daniel. He made decision after decision, practicing that kind of character since he was a young man, and he kept doing so even when he had incredible accolades and freedom in the highest courts in the land. His character was not determined by his circumstances. His circumstances were shaped by his character. And he did it one decision after a little decision every day until it developed into a life character that is worth modeling. I love the way author Eugene Peterson talks about this kind of character. He wrote a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Just walking over the history and course of your life in the same direction of obedience, one day after another day, step after step. And as we understand and learn what honors God and what obedience to Him looks like, we take steps in that direction, and as a result, our character grows into something that is worth honoring. Step by step toward Jesus. That's what Daniel did, and it became obvious in his life, so much so that his peers started getting really jealous. And that's what often happens when we have high character. Even if you don't intend it, other people get annoyed by it. So what do? They decide to get to him the only way they could see, which was by picking on his religious faith. And friends, don't be surprised when that happens to you. After all, he's a Hebrew, they're Medes and Persians, they worship different gods, so he's persecuted for his faith. And even if the issue in your life, what often happens is the issue has nothing to do with faith really, but for whatever reason, somebody picks up on that and they're going to use your faith as a source of attack. And when that happens, it may be emotional for you. It may get you worked up. You may feel like you need to stand up and lash out and defend Jesus. And there may be times when speaking up for your faith is absolutely the right response. But notice that before he ever speaks, before he does anything, look at what happens in Daniel's life. Look what he does. The king offers an edict that everybody who doesn't worship him is going to be killed. In verse 10, when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home, threw everything against the wall. He went home, he knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. And then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. He didn't go to social media. We have so much to talk about there, don't we? Too deep of a hole. He didn't march down the hall to the other person's office. He didn't take it out on his kids. He went home and he prayed. If we want to fight the lions that we're going to face in our lives, we have to take the example of David and choose to dedicate ourselves to persistent prayer. Dedicate ourselves to persistent prayer. And I know it's an obvious thing to hear at church, to tell you, like, you really should pray. We should. And we all know we should pray more, right? We get a few head nods, like we should pray more than we probably do. We all know that while prayer works and it's awesome, it sometimes can be hard and confusing, and we have to it's hard to squeeze it into our hectic lives. And I wish I had a formula to give you that was automatic, but here's what we see in Scripture, specifically through Daniel. Prayer just comes first. It just comes first. It isn't a last second throw up a prayer to God in the final moment. Daniel has set prayer times in his life 3 times a day. He had a rhythm of prayer. He had a specific spot in an upstairs room. That's why when they came looking for him, they're like, he's probably right. Yep, there he is right there in the window. He's predictable. Of course he's praying. That's what he did at that time every single day. The lions in our lives, friends, we don't always see them coming. That's how lions are. They're sneaky. But you better believe that they are in the bushes waiting for the moment. And if we are not faithfully praying and asking God for wisdom, we are setting ourselves up for failure. That's what we're doing. Daniel models for us that if we want to battle the lions, before we even know what the lions are, we have to have regular set prayer times that keep the kind of consistency with God that he models for us. So, are the prayers in the minivan with all the kids going crazy in the back, like, are those real prayers? Yes, they absolutely are, okay? Are the walking into a meeting, I really don't want to lose my job right now, God, please help me not say the wrong thing, prayers, do those count? 100% those count. Should we stop and say a prayer of thanks over our food together when we sit down for a meal or something? 100% thank God for your food. But prayer should become more than that. It should become a consistent, regular part of our schedule, and it will not carve out time for itself. We got to put it in there like we put that doctor's appointment in there that we will not miss because it takes 6 months to reschedule. Put it in like that. Like it's got to go. We just have to figure it out. I remember when I was 19 years old, I did an internship in ministry in Cincinnati area, and I lived with the pastor of the church and his wife for the summer. And I stayed in their upstairs guest room, and across the hall was another guest room, and it was set up kind of like a home office. The very first morning of my internship, I woke up, it was still dusk, it was like barely morning, and I woke up because I thought I was having a dream that people were whispering. It was kind of a weird dream. I woke up, and as soon as I realized I'm awake, I heard the whispering still. And I was like, no, that's actual whispering. This is getting weird. You know, I'm in a strange house, strange room. Why do I hear whispering? And as I explored it a little more, I realized the sound was coming from across the hall in the other guest room. And there, early in the morning, this faithful pastor was in there with the door closed, pouring his heart out to God before he headed into work that day. And you know what? I woke up to whispers every day that summer. And it was awesome. It was the greatest gift he could have given me in that internship. What an example set for me, and without ever saying a word to me, and to my knowledge, he doesn't even know that I know about that. He just did what he always did. He took time with Jesus before he went to do the work of Jesus. Now, he went to bed at like 8:30, and he didn't have kids at home anymore, so I get it. Different seasons of life are easier than others. But friends, we have to find ways to build in what some people call the prayer closet moments into our lives. And maybe sometimes in your season of life, you have to actually go into the closet to have a minute with Jesus alone. You just have to go somewhere like, where's mom? I don't know, she went to change clothes like 3 days ago, and she's... Without Jesus, we are banking on our personal and collective wisdom. And I know you're smart, but it's not enough. Daniel had followed God for 85 years. The dude had supernatural gifts to interpret dreams. He had experienced more of the movement of God in his life than we could ever hope to experience. And he was considered a top mind in multiple world superpowers. And yet he knew the importance of seeking the wisdom of God in his life, so much so he did it 3 times a day. Is that enough of an inspiration to challenge us to seek the wisdom of God? I saw this picture the other day of what one person did. They had redecorated their house a little bit. They had this area they wanted to create a physical prayer closet, or what the movie by the same name calls a war room. And they took this spot underneath their steps, and they made this nice little area. And this was just big enough for a chair and a Bible and a notepad, basically. And this lady says, this is where I do battle. I do battle on my knees in that room. This is where she seeks wisdom. That's where she keeps herself recognizing what Daniel told king after king after king. He kept telling them, it's the Most High. The Most High God is the one who is sovereign above every kingdom of this world. That includes this nation. That includes this church, your family, your life. Maybe you need a war room. Maybe you just need to get up 15 minutes earlier. I don't know. Maybe you need to put down your phone and stop scrolling through the very addictive reels. Why are you watching people pop zits anyway? Like, really? Do we really need to watch that? I don't know what it is for you, but this is the sort of spiritual training that is critical if we are going to battle the lions that we are most certainly going to face, and we don't even know they're coming. Sure was for Daniel. Now, in this particular time, his meditative prayer time didn't last very long because his co-workers came looking. In verse 13. Then they told the king, so they show up, they told the king, Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. And hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of the predicament. He had declared a law that was unbreakable, that anyone who didn't bow down to him was going to be killed. He did the same thing that every king in the book of Daniel does. He starts thinking everything's about him. And so he declares a law about celebrating him. And he let them talk him into it, and now he has to kill his most trusted cabinet member. Flip down to verse 16. So at last the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. And the king said to him, may your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles so that no one could rescue Daniel. And then the king returned to his palace, and he spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment, and he couldn't sleep at all that night. Again, let's not forget the context. This is not Motel 6, right? He is thrown into a pit that only exists for death and destruction. He's facing some animals that thrive on killing live prey and eating it. That's what they do. That's what they're best at. And notice who is the most stressed out in the story? It's not Daniel. It's the king. He doesn't sleep a wink all night. Why? Because he kind of still forgot he thinks he's in control. He thinks he's the one that directed everything. After all, this is his own royal seal. It's his lion pit. It's his instructions. He's the one that set the law. But the Most High God is truly in control and is working behind the scenes. Verse 19. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. And when he got there, he called out in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lions?" Waited, listened, and Daniel answered, "Long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouth so they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty." And the king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den, and not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. Daniel spent a night alone with lions, and he lived to tell about it. So what else does Daniel do in his battle to learn how to fight lions? Well, he shows us how to demonstrate a godly perspective. We have to have a godly perspective if we have a shot. As it turns out, we talk about all this fighting lions and preparation, and Daniel, the threat wasn't really the lions. I mean, Daniel never really ended up having to fight lions at all. The lions that he was fighting weren't real lions. In fact, the other people that he thought he was battling in his life, the king or his co-workers that were coming against him, turns out they weren't really lions either. It wasn't the previous king that he was battling in his life, or the king before him, or all of the challenges that he was facing. Those weren't really that many lions either. The battle at the very core of his life was with an enemy lion. His name is Satan, and he was prowling around looking to devour Daniel at every turn. And ultimately, it's the power of God displayed in him to the glory of God that got him through every situation. And the king finally saw the hand of God clearly. And he said this in verse 26. "I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His rule will never end. He rescues and saves people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. And he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." He was saved from a pack of ferocious lions. One person pointed out to me earlier today that he left out the goriest part where all the people that made him make that law, they threw all of them in there with all their family and everything. And before they hit the ground, the lions devoured them. Because that's what lions do. I heard a story about a park ranger from Kruger National Park in South Africa where there are lions, and he is one of the few people on the planet who has been attacked by a lion and lived. And one day, he tells the story, he was riding his horse through the national park, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a lion just attacked him, knocks him off the horse, and then the lion went for the horse and just kills the horse and starts eating the horse. Before he could even get his bearings at all, he heard this horrible roar, and as he turned, another lion attacked him. And as that lion landed on him, it attacked him and bit him all on his shoulder. He's crying out in pain. But he realized in that moment, thankfully, the lion got his shoulder and not his throat. And while he was in excruciating pain, he was alive, and he remembered the training that I guess you go through when you're working at a park where there's lions, of what to do if you're attacked by a lion. The best thing you can do is to just go completely limp and pretend like you're dead. So he tried to play dead and convince the lion, don't bite any harder. So the lion thought he was dead. and held on to him by his shoulder and began to drag him 60 yards to the lion's lair. As he's telling the story, he said, it was awful. My face was shoved into the lion's mane. The smell was terrible. The lion, as he walked, thinking he had killed his prey, purred all the way there. Which reminds me, cat owners, they would eat you if they could. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, pray about that. He said the whole time while he was being drugged there, he's trying to figure out, what do I do next? If I ever move at all, I get killed. If I don't move, he starts eating me. Like, what am I going to do? So he started reaching around. One arm's in the lion's mouth. He starts reaching around on his belt and realizes, to his indescribable joy, that he still had his knife attached to his belt. So he slowly reaches down and he grabs the knife, very slowly takes the knife out of the sheath, and with careful consideration, he decides to go straight for the heart of the lion. And he had to do it really slowly because any swift movement was going to alert the lion and mean instant death. And so he carefully grabs that knife and plunges it upward into the heart of the lion, and takes it again and stabs the heart of the lion, and then moves the knife up toward the jugular of the lion, and the lion instantly falls dead and releases his shoulder. Why would I tell you such a graphic story about a lion? I mean, we're talking about nice little purring, kind lions in the story, right? Because I want you to feel just a little bit of the emotion of a lion attack. Because we are at risk, friends, of minimizing the power of this story when we reduce it to a kid's story about being brave. That's not what this story is. This is a horror story. This is a story about the salvation of Daniel and the forgiveness of a king and the hope of anyone in this room, anyone joining us online. Because the Lion of Judah, Jesus, is also the Lamb who chose to be slain. He went and faced the lion that wants to destroy all of us, the enemy. He ultimately paid the penalty for me and you. There was no saving him from the lions. He paid the price. And he promises us, friends, to go with us into whatever kind of lions we are going to have to battle. He will walk with us if we will hold tight to him. If we will walk with the kind of character and the dedication to trusting him, he will walk with us through whatever it is we face. And on the other side, we will have a story of the power of God to tell. Let's pray. Lord, thank you that you remind us through Daniel that there are lions. I mean, there are things waiting. We've got to prepare ourselves for battle. And yet we know, God, that you're the one who has already defeated the grave. You've already beaten the enemy. So we hold tight to you, God. We take a step towards you every day in character, that you might shape us to become more like Jesus today than we were yesterday. And for some of us, it's a step to say, I know I need to give my life and allow the sacrifice of the Lamb take away the sins of my life and put me on path for the kind of character that honors you. We pray in the power and the name of Jesus.